The cruelest promotions in life sometimes begin with the words, "You are fired." The conference room felt colder than the January wind rattling the glass walls outside, even though the thermostat insisted it was 72 degrees. My palms rested against the polished oak table, trying to hide the slight tremble in my fingers as the quarterly earnings presentation flashed across the massive screen behind our department director. I had rehearsed my report until 2 in the morning, fueled by vending machine coffee and the stubborn hope that hard work eventually mattered. At 28, I still believed effort could outweigh politics. I was wrong. My name appeared on the final slide, followed immediately by a sharp laugh from across the table. Mr. Caldwell, our regional director, leaned back in his leather chair as though my future weighed less than the paper cup sitting beside him. "Claire Bennett," he said, slowly removing his glasses. "You have managed to embarrass this company one last time." Confusion hit me first, then disbelief. Every spreadsheet had been verified. Every report had been approved. I opened my notebook, searching for whatever mistake he believed I had made. But before I could speak, another executive slid a folder across the table. "You defended an employee who violated company policy," she said without looking at me. "Your judgment is no longer compatible with this organization." I stared at the folder without touching it. The room remained painfully quiet for half a heartbeat before someone near the windows chuckled. Then another joined in. Soon the silence dissolved into polite smiles and whispered conversations, the kind people used when they wanted to convince themselves they were not participating in someone else's humiliation. I finally lifted my eyes. Around the long table sat people I had shared birthdays with, covered shifts for, and helped finish impossible deadlines. Not one of them looked back at me. Their attention drifted toward laptops, notebooks, or coffee cups that suddenly became fascinating. My throat tightened, but I refused to let them see tears. "May I ask what policy I violated?" I said quietly. Mr. Caldwell folded his hands. "You questioned management in front of clients. I corrected inaccurate information that blamed an intern for an accounting error she did not make." "Exactly." His answer landed like ice. "We expect loyalty to leadership." I took a slow breath. Outside, snow drifted between the downtown buildings, soft and almost peaceful compared with the storm inside that room. I thought leadership meant protecting the people who did the work. A few uncomfortable faces shifted. Someone coughed. Mr. Caldwell smiled without warmth. "Your employment ends today." He pushed the folder another inch toward me. "Security will escort you after the meeting." A quiet laugh echoed near the back wall. "You are fired," another manager added with obvious satisfaction. "Try not to make this more dramatic than it needs to be." I reached for the folder with steady hands despite the ache spreading through my chest. Years of overtime, missed holidays, skipped family dinners, and endless weekends suddenly fit inside a thin envelope. I stood slowly, gathering my notebook instead of arguing. Pride was lighter to carry than resentment. As I turned toward the door, I noticed someone sitting alone near the back of the conference room where visiting investors usually observed presentations. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit and remained completely silent while everyone else avoided my eyes. He did not smile. He did not whisper. He simply watched with an expression so calm it almost unsettled me. For one brief moment our eyes met. There was no pity in his gaze, only careful attention, as though he had just witnessed something he would never forget. I looked away first, squared my shoulders, and walked toward the exit, believing I had just left the worst day of my life behind me, never imagining that the quiet stranger would change everything before another sunrise. The elevator doors closed with a soft chime that sounded strangely louder than the laughter I had just left behind. My reflection stared back at me from the polished steel walls, composed on the outside and quietly unraveling underneath. I tightened my grip around the cardboard box holding my framed family photo, a coffee mug with a fading company logo, and the notebook that had followed me through 5 years of late nights and impossible deadlines. 5 years reduced to a box that barely weighed 10 pounds. When the elevator reached the lobby, warm air carrying the scent of fresh coffee drifted from the cafe near the entrance. Employees hurried past with phones pressed against their ears, completely unaware that someone else's world had just fallen apart a few floors above them. I kept walking. If I stopped, I knew the tears waiting behind my eyes might finally win. Outside, the winter wind wrapped around me the moment the revolving doors released me onto the sidewalk. Snowflakes floated through the afternoon light, soft enough to look beautiful but cold enough to sting my cheeks. I stood there for a moment, unsure where to go. Home meant another conversation with overdue bills spread across my kitchen table. Looking for another job meant explaining why I had been dismissed. Neither option felt easy. A voice interrupted my thoughts. "Miss Bennett." I turned and found the elderly janitor from the 5th floor struggling with a cart loaded with cleaning supplies. One of the large storage boxes had slipped sideways, scattering paper towels and bottles across the sidewalk. Without thinking, I set my own belongings down and hurried over. "I have it," I said, kneeling to gather the supplies before the wind carried them farther away. The old man smiled with tired eyes. "You should not be helping me today." I heard what happened. I forced a small smile. "That does not change the fact that you still need help." Together we lifted the heavy box back onto the cart. He reached into his pocket and offered me a folded $20 bill. "Please take this. Buy yourself dinner." I stepped back and gently shook my head. "Keep it. I still have enough to get home." His eyes grew brighter with quiet gratitude. "You are one of the few people in that building who ever remembered my name." Before I could answer, another sound drew my attention. A young woman wearing an employee badge hurried out of the front entrance, tears streaming down her face. It was Emily, the accounting intern I had defended in the meeting. She stopped when she saw me. "I am so sorry," she whispered. "This is my fault." I crossed the sidewalk and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "No, never apologize because someone else chose convenience over honesty." She lowered her head. "Everyone is saying I should have stayed quiet. If telling the truth costs you something," I replied softly. "It was never free to begin with." She nodded, wiping away her tears before walking toward the subway station. Neither of us noticed the black luxury sedan parked across the street. Behind the tinted rear window, Vincent Moretti remained perfectly still. His driver waited without speaking while two discreet security professionals stood several feet away, blending into the busy sidewalk. Vincent had watched the entire exchange from the moment Claire left the building. He had expected anger, accusations, or desperation. Instead, he watched a woman who had just lost everything stop to help a janitor, comfort a frightened intern, and refuse money she clearly needed. His expression never changed, but his fingers tapped once against the leather armrest before he quietly looked toward his longtime advisor. "Everything they said about her," Vincent murmured, his calm voice barely louder than the falling snow, "was incomplete." His advisor waited. Vincent looked back through the window as Claire disappeared into the crowd, carrying nothing except a small cardboard box and her dignity. "Find out who really runs that company," he said. "By tonight. I want to know exactly what they tried to bury." The apartment felt unnaturally quiet that evening, as though even the old radiator had decided to respect the silence settling inside me. I placed the cardboard box on my tiny kitchen table beside a stack of unpaid utility bills and the half-finished grocery list I had been stretching for weeks. The clock on the microwave read 6:23. 12 hours earlier, I still believed I had a career. Now I was calculating how many days I could afford before my savings disappeared. I slipped off my shoes and stared out the window at the snow drifting across the parking lot. The city kept moving without asking who had fallen behind. My phone buzzed against the counter. For one hopeful second, I imagined the company calling to admit they had made a mistake. Instead, it was my landlord reminding me that rent would be due in 4 days. I closed my eyes and took a slow breath before answering with a promise I prayed I could keep. After the call ended, I opened my laptop and began updating my resume. 5 years of dedication filled a single page. It looked painfully small compared with everything those years had demanded from me. Every promotion I had earned, every weekend I had sacrificed, every holiday spent answering emails while my family celebrated without me. None of it could explain why honesty had become a reason to lose everything. Across the city, Vincent Moretti sat inside a private office overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected thousands of lights against the dark winter sky while a quiet fire burned inside the marble fireplace behind him. His attention never drifted toward the view. Instead, several neatly organized reports rested across the conference table. His chief financial advisor turned another page before speaking. The numbers do not match their public statements. Revenue has been manipulated for 3 consecutive quarters. Employee bonuses were quietly redirected into executive compensation. There are also multiple complaints that never reached the board. Vincent listened without interrupting. And Claire Bennett? Another folder slid across the table. Excellent performance reviews every year. No disciplinary record. Multiple recommendations from clients. She defended an accounting intern after discovering management planned to blame her for internal reporting errors. Vincent opened the folder and studied the photograph clipped inside. It showed the same woman carrying a cardboard box through falling snow only hours earlier. Calm eyes, professional smile. Nothing about the image suggested someone who looked for attention. Who authorized her termination? He asked quietly. Regional Director Richard Caldwell. Ownership. The company is publicly traded, but the majority shareholders have been trying to sell their controlling interest for months. Silence settled over the room. Vincent slowly closed the folder before standing. Every movement remained measured, almost effortless. The people around him had worked beside him for years. They recognized that silence better than raised voices. It usually meant a decision had already been made. Vincent walked toward the window, watching headlights move through the streets below like steady rivers of light. Begin negotiations tonight, he said without turning around. Purchase every available controlling share. His advisor hesitated only long enough to confirm he had heard correctly. The entire company? Vincent nodded once. If leadership has forgotten the value of integrity, then leadership needs to change. Meanwhile, unaware that conversations worth hundreds of millions of dollars had already begun because of one quiet act of courage, I closed my laptop and reached for the framed photograph inside my cardboard box. It showed my late father standing beside me on my college graduation day, smiling with the kind of pride that could make impossible dreams feel ordinary. I traced the edge of the frame with my thumb and whispered words he had repeated throughout my childhood. Character costs something because it is worth something. I smiled through tired eyes. Tomorrow I would start again. I had no idea that somewhere across the city, someone else had already decided my story was far from over. Morning arrived with pale winter sunlight spilling across my apartment floor, but it did nothing to warm the uncertainty waiting beside my bed. I woke before my alarm out of habit, reached for a company email that would never arrive, and stopped halfway through the motion. For the first time in 5 years, I had nowhere I was expected to be. The realization settled quietly inside me, heavier than I wanted to admit. I brewed the last scoop of coffee left in the cabinet and opened my laptop once again, sending resumes to companies that had probably already received hundreds before mine. Every application ended with the same sentence asking why I had left my previous position. I typed. I deleted. Then I simply wrote, seeking an opportunity that values integrity. It was the only answer I could live with. Across Manhattan, the atmosphere inside Vincent Moretti's headquarters carried none of the uncertainty filling my apartment. The executive conference room overlooked the skyline through walls of glass, where snow continued drifting between towers of steel and light. A team of financial analysts stood around a digital display covered with market data that changed every few seconds. Numbers climbed, percentages shifted, ownership structures unfolded across the screen like an intricate puzzle. Vincent remained seated at the head of the table, listening more than speaking. His legal counsel adjusted another document before looking toward him. 3 institutional investors have accepted preliminary terms overnight. 2 additional shareholders are prepared to negotiate this morning. If everything proceeds as expected, controlling interest can be secured before the market closes. Vincent nodded once. Resistance. Minimal. Most of them have wanted to exit for months. Another advisor opened a separate file. There is something else. Internal interviews confirmed that several employees attempted to report accounting concerns. Those reports disappeared before reaching the board. Miss Bennett was not the first person to question management. She was simply the first to do it publicly. Silence settled over the room. Vincent folded his hands together, his expression unchanged, but everyone present understood the significance of that silence. He was not interested in appearances. He wanted patterns. "And the intern?" he asked. Emily Carter submitted evidence proving the reporting error originated with senior management. The documents were ignored. Vincent looked toward the skyline before speaking again. A company does not lose its values overnight. Someone teaches people to stop telling the truth. No one answered because no answer was necessary. His chief advisor glanced toward the acquisition timeline displayed across the wall. "We can finalize everything today if you approve the final offer." Vincent stood, buttoning his charcoal suit jacket with calm precision. "Proceed." Thousands of shares changed hands through quiet conversations taking place inside private offices, encrypted conference calls, and carefully prepared agreements. No headlines appeared. No reporters gathered outside buildings. The city continued moving as though nothing remarkable was happening. Yet with every completed signature, ownership shifted a little more. Meanwhile, I walked into the neighborhood library carrying my resume inside a simple folder. Internet access was free there, and every dollar mattered now. As I searched through new job listings, an elderly librarian approached with a gentle smile. "You were here helping students with interview practice last month, were you not?" I smiled back despite everything. "Yes." She nodded toward an empty meeting room. "A young man has an interview this afternoon and looks terrified. Would you mind encouraging him?" For a brief moment I considered saying no. I had every reason to think only about my own problems. Instead, I followed her into the room. 20 minutes later, the nervous college graduate walked out standing a little taller than when he had entered. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "You made me believe I actually belong in that interview." I watched him leave with a quiet smile, unaware that several miles away the final approval had just been given. Vincent Moretti closed the acquisition folder, looked at the completed ownership report resting before him, and spoke only 6 words that would change my life before another sunrise. "Prepare for tomorrow morning's board meeting." Monday morning carried the strange energy that always followed a weekend of unanswered rumors. I was standing in line at a neighborhood coffee shop, counting the cash left in my wallet before ordering the smallest cup on the menu, when my phone vibrated with a message from Emily. Contained only one sentence. "Something unbelievable is happening at the office." I stared at the screen, uncertain whether I even wanted to know. My former workplace no longer belonged to me. Whatever happened inside those glass walls should have felt distant. Instead, curiosity settled quietly beside the disappointment I had been carrying since Friday. Before I could answer, another message arrived. "Everyone has been ordered into the executive conference room at 9 sharp. Nobody knows why." I slipped the phone into my coat pocket and stepped outside with warm coffee between my hands. Snow had stopped during the night, leaving the sidewalks bright beneath the morning sun. Across downtown Manhattan, employees hurried through revolving doors with anxious expressions, whispering as elevators filled beyond capacity. Nobody understood why outside attorneys had arrived before sunrise. Nobody recognized the discreet financial specialists reviewing documents in vacant offices. The only certainty was that something enormous had changed while the city slept. Richard Caldwell adjusted his expensive tie for the 3rd time in 10 minutes as he entered the executive conference room. The confidence he had displayed only 3 days earlier seemed noticeably thinner. Every department manager had received the same unexpected email requiring immediate attendance. No explanation. No agenda, just one sentence stating that corporate ownership had changed effective immediately. Nervous conversations spread across the room until the doors quietly opened again. Vincent Moretti entered without haste, wearing the same calm expression Claire had noticed during the meeting that ended her career. His charcoal suit fit with effortless precision, while the attorneys and advisors following several respectful steps behind him carried tablets and neatly organized folders instead of raising their voices. The room slowly became silent. Vincent did not ask for attention. He simply waited until every conversation disappeared on its own. "Good morning," he said evenly. "My name is Vincent Moretti. As of 8:15 this morning, my investment group has acquired controlling ownership of this company." A wave of stunned whispers rolled across the conference room. Richard blinked several times before forcing a practiced smile. "Congratulations, Mr. Moretti. We were not informed ownership negotiations had progressed so quickly." Vincent looked toward him with polite composure. "That was intentional." The simple answer settled over the room with surprising weight. One attorney stepped forward and distributed sealed envelopes to every executive seated around the table. Nobody opened them immediately. Nobody wanted to be first. Vincent rested one hand lightly against the conference table. "Before discussing future strategy, I spent the weekend reviewing your financial records, employee evaluations, ethics reports, and internal communications." Richard's confident posture shifted almost imperceptibly. Vincent continued speaking with the same measured tone. "Companies succeed because people trust one another. The moment integrity becomes negotiable, every profit becomes temporary." No accusation appeared in his voice. No anger colored his words. Yet several executives quietly lowered their eyes. Miles away, completely unaware of the meeting unfolding above the skyline, I sat inside the public library helping another job seeker prepare for an interview. My own future remained uncertain, but encouraging someone else somehow made the uncertainty easier to carry. As the young applicant thanked me before leaving, my phone vibrated again. This time Emily's message was shorter than the first. "Claire, you need to keep your phone close today. I think someone is about to change everything." The first time my phone rang, I ignored it because I assumed it was another recruiter politely explaining that they had chosen a candidate with more recent experience. The second time, I looked at the unfamiliar number without answering. By the third call, something inside me whispered that coincidence had finally run out. I stepped into the quiet hallway outside the library before pressing the green button. "This is Claire Bennett," I said carefully. A calm professional voice answered immediately. "Miss Bennett, my name is Rebecca Lawson. I am calling from the executive office of Moretti Capital. Our chairman would appreciate the opportunity to meet with you this afternoon if your schedule allows." I frowned, convinced there had been a mistake. "I think you may have the wrong person." "No, Miss Bennett. We are looking for you specifically." Before I could ask another question, she continued with the same quiet confidence. "Transportation has already been arranged if you choose to accept the invitation. There is no obligation. The decision is entirely yours." After ending the call, I remained standing in the hallway, staring through the tall windows at the snow-covered streets below. Moretti Capital. I had heard the name before. Everyone in New York had. The company invested in industries most people only read about in financial magazines. Why would someone like that want to speak with someone who had spent the morning sending resumes from a public library? Across the city, the atmosphere inside my former office had changed completely. Every executive remained seated while Vincent Moretti reviewed one document after another with patient precision. No voices were raised. No dramatic speeches filled the room. The silence itself carried more authority than anger ever could. Richard Caldwell finally cleared his throat. "Mr. Moretti, if there are concerns regarding previous management decisions, I am certain we can resolve them internally." Vincent slowly closed the folder in front of him before meeting Richard's eyes. "That is exactly what I intend to do." Another attorney quietly placed additional files before each executive. Vincent continued in the same measured tone. "Independent auditors confirmed multiple violations of corporate policy, deliberate suppression of employee reports, and retaliation against staff members who acted with integrity." Several executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Richard attempted another smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Surely these matters require additional investigation." "They already received it," Vincent replied. Facts do not become less accurate because they are inconvenient. The room became completely silent. Vincent stood and walked toward the windows overlooking the city. Leadership is a privilege earned through responsibility, not protected through intimidation or pride. Effective immediately, every executive named in those reports has been placed on administrative leave pending formal review. Nobody argued. Nobody even seemed capable of speaking. The attorneys calmly collected company credentials and access cards, while human resources representatives waited respectfully near the entrance. It happened without shouting, without humiliation, and without celebration. Accountability arrived quietly. Several miles away, I finally accepted the invitation after nearly 20 minutes of hesitation. A black luxury sedan arrived outside the library exactly when promised. The driver stepped out, opened the rear door, and greeted me with professional courtesy. During the drive through Manhattan, I watched familiar streets disappear behind tinted glass, wondering whether I had somehow wandered into someone else's story. As the vehicle turned through elegant iron gates and stopped before a modern glass headquarters bearing the discreet silver letters of Moretti Capital, my heartbeat quickened. The receptionist welcomed me by name before leading me toward a private executive floor. When the elevator doors opened, I saw the same man who had silently watched me leave my former company carrying nothing except a cardboard box and my dignity. Vincent Moretti looked up from the conference table, offered a small respectful nod, and said the first words he had ever spoken directly to me. "Miss Bennett, thank you for coming. I believe it is time someone finally listened to your side of the story." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The office around me reflected the afternoon skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows, but my attention never left the man standing across the conference table. Vincent Moretti carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who never needed to raise his voice to be heard. I finally sat down after he motioned toward the chair opposite him. A fresh cup of coffee rested beside a neatly organized folder with my name printed across the front. Nothing about the room felt intimidating. Somehow that made it even more difficult to understand why I was there. Vincent folded his hands calmly. "Before we discuss anything else, I owe you an explanation." I looked at him without speaking. "I attended your company's quarterly meeting as a prospective investor," he continued. "I watched what happened. More importantly, I watched what happened afterward. I immediately remembered the quiet stranger sitting near the back of the conference room. "You saw everything," I whispered. He nodded once. "I saw someone lose her position because she refused to sacrifice another person's honesty." My throat tightened. For the first time since Friday, someone had described the situation exactly as it had happened. Vincent gently pushed the folder toward me. "Please open it." Inside were copies of internal reports, performance evaluations, client recommendations, and the written complaint Emily had tried to submit before it disappeared. Every page confirmed the truth I had struggled to defend alone. I looked up in disbelief. "How did you find all of this?" "Because facts usually leave footprints," he answered. "Someone simply has to care enough to follow them." He stood and walked toward the windows overlooking Manhattan before continuing. "This morning, my investment group completed the acquisition of your former company. The executive team responsible for suppressing those reports has been removed from active leadership pending formal review. Independent auditors have already begun their work." I stared at him, unsure whether I had heard correctly. "You bought the company?" He turned back toward me with the same calm expression. "I invested in the opportunity to rebuild it." The difference between those two sentences settled quietly inside me. He was not speaking about power. He was speaking about responsibility. Vincent returned to the table and placed another document in front of me. "Claire, I am not interested in rewarding you because I feel sorry for you. Sympathy fades. Character does not." My eyes moved toward the first page. It was an official offer to return as Director of Employee Development and Corporate Ethics, reporting directly to the new executive leadership. I looked up almost immediately. "I am not qualified for this position." A faint smile appeared for the first time. "According to your record, you have already been doing that job without the title." I lowered my eyes again, overwhelmed by everything that had changed in only a few days. There must be people with more experience. Vincent nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps, but experience teaches people how to succeed. Integrity teaches them why success matters. The room became quiet once more. Outside, afternoon sunlight reflected across the neighboring buildings, filling the office with warm light. I slowly closed the folder without signing anything. Vincent noticed the movement but showed no disappointment. "You do not have to answer today," he said. "The decision must belong to you." I met his eyes and saw no pressure there, only patience. After everything I had experienced, that simple respect felt almost unbelievable. As I stood to leave, Vincent spoke one final sentence that followed me all the way to the elevator. "The company needed a new owner," he said quietly. "But I believe the people inside it have been waiting much longer for someone willing to protect what cannot be measured on a balance sheet." The ride home felt shorter than it had that afternoon, although the streets were just as crowded and the traffic lights changed with the same patient rhythm. I held the folder Vincent had given me across my lap without opening it again. Somehow it felt heavier than the cardboard box I had carried out of my former office only a few days earlier. That box had contained everything I thought I had left. This folder contained everything I never expected to receive. When I unlocked my apartment door, the familiar silence greeted me once again. I placed the folder beside my father's framed photograph and stood there for several long moments, remembering the countless evenings he had reminded me that the hardest decisions were never about choosing success. They were about choosing the kind of person success would allow me to become. I finally opened the folder again, reading every page carefully from beginning to end. The salary would erase every financial worry I had carried for years. The title carried more responsibility than anything I had imagined. Yet one sentence continued returning to my thoughts. "The decision must belong to you." Vincent had offered an opportunity without trying to purchase my gratitude. That difference mattered more than he probably realized. The next morning I returned to Moretti Capital with a notebook instead of an answer. Rebecca greeted me with the same warm professionalism before leading me toward the executive floor. Vincent was already reviewing documents when I entered, but he closed the folder in front of him the moment I arrived. "Good morning, Miss Bennett." "Good morning." I remained standing for a moment before placing the unsigned agreement on the table between us. "I have a condition." A faint expression of curiosity crossed his face. "Go ahead." I took a careful breath. "If I accept this position, I do not want special treatment because of what happened to me. I want every employee to have the same opportunity to be heard. Anonymous reporting must be protected. Promotions should be based on performance. Interns deserve mentors instead of fear. And the janitors, receptionists, assistants, and support staff should be treated with the same respect as executives." The room became completely still. Vincent did not interrupt once. When I finished speaking, he remained silent for several seconds before slowly smiling in a way I had not seen before. It was not the smile of someone who had won a negotiation. It was the quiet satisfaction of someone whose expectations had just been exceeded. "You realize," he said calmly, "that you could have asked for a larger salary instead." I smiled back. "Money solves bills. Respect changes lives." He nodded once. "Then your conditions are accepted." There was no hesitation, no attempt to bargain. His legal counsel immediately made notes while Rebecca quietly updated the agreement. I watched them work, almost unable to believe the conversation was real. Vincent looked toward me again. "Claire, companies often invest millions in technology, while forgetting that trust costs far less and returns far more. I signed the agreement only after every requested change had been added." As I handed the pen back, Vincent extended his hand across the table. His handshake was firm, respectful, and brief. "Welcome back," he said. I shook my head gently. "Not back." He raised an eyebrow. "Forward." For the first time since losing my job, I felt the weight inside my chest begin to lift. Outside the windows, the morning sun reflected across the skyline, illuminating the city one building at a time. Standing there beside the man who could have measured success by wealth alone, I realized he had chosen to measure it by something far rarer. He had restored a company with his resources, but he intended to rebuild its culture with people who refused to compromise their character. And somehow, without either of us planning it, our shared belief in doing what was right had become the strongest foundation either of us could have imagined. The first Monday after the transition did not feel like the beginning of a new job. It felt like the first sunrise after a long winter that everyone had quietly survived together. As I walked through the front entrance, familiar faces greeted me with uncertain smiles instead of nervous silence. The reception desk looked the same. The elevators sounded the same. Even the polished floors reflected the morning light exactly as they always had. Yet everything important had changed. Employees who had once lowered their voices now greeted one another openly. Department managers paused to thank assistants who had spent years working without recognition. The atmosphere no longer carried the invisible weight of fear, carried possibility. Emily met me outside the conference room with tears shining in her eyes, but this time they came from relief instead of anxiety. She wrapped me in a brief hug before stepping back with an embarrassed laugh. "I never thought I would see this place feel different," she admitted. "Neither did I answered honestly. Throughout the morning, I met with employees from every department. Some wanted to discuss ideas for improving communication. Others simply wanted someone willing to listen without interrupting. I filled pages of my notebook with suggestions, concerns, and quiet hopes that had remained hidden for years. Every conversation reminded me that people rarely asked for perfection. They only wanted fairness. Late that afternoon, I paused outside the executive floor and looked through the glass toward the city skyline glowing beneath the setting sun. Vincent stood alone near the windows, reviewing the final reports of the day. When he noticed me, he closed the folder in his hands and walked over with the same calm confidence I had come to recognize. "How was your first day?" he asked. I smiled, exhausted in the best possible way. "Busy, honest, hopeful." He nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds like progress." We stood quietly for a moment, watching traffic flow through the streets below like ribbons of light stretching toward the horizon. "May I ask you something?" I said. "Of course." I looked toward the skyline before finding the right words. "You could have invested anywhere. Why this company?" Vincent remained silent long enough that I wondered whether I had asked something too personal. Finally, he answered. "People assume I purchased a business because I saw financial potential. The truth is simpler. I saw one employee lose everything because she refused to abandon her principles. If a company can remove its most honest person that easily, then the business model is already broken." His words settled quietly inside me. "You changed thousands of lives with one decision." He shook his head gently. "No, I created an opportunity. People like you are the reason lasting change becomes possible." I laughed softly. "You always give other people more credit than yourself." A faint smile crossed his face. "Leadership is not about standing in front of everyone. It is about making certain they never have to stand alone." As evening settled across Manhattan, I realized something I had completely missed during the hardest days of my life. Losing my job had never been the ending I feared. It had become the unexpected doorway to a future I would never have been brave enough to imagine on my own. Vincent had the resources to purchase buildings, companies, and opportunities that most people could barely comprehend. Yet the decision that transformed both of our lives had nothing to do with wealth. It began the moment he quietly noticed a stranger choosing integrity over convenience. Looking back now, I understand that success is measured by more than titles, salaries, or corner offices. The greatest victories belong to the people who protect their character when nobody is applauding, because sooner or later the right person notices, and when integrity finally meets opportunity, an ordinary life can become extraordinary without ever forgetting where it began.